And so, hi, good morning. Welcome to the December 23rd, 2021 Inspiring Author Conversations. I'm Kathy Davis with Davis Creative Publishing Partners, and today we'll be speaking with Kent Sanders about how to build a writing habit. Before we welcome Kent officially, I want to first remind everyone of a few logistic details. The call is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to the YouTube video within a few days. We have the holiday coming up, so it may be early next week here. And please mute yourself on your end so to avoid any background noise. Your chat button is at the bottom. If you scroll your mouse over the bottom of your screen, you should find your chat button. Please drop any of your questions into the chat box, and I'll watch that while Kent is talking and make sure we get all your questions answered. We promise to end the call around noon, 12:15 at the latest. Our theme for 2021, and actually it's our last month of 2021, and for 2022 will continue to be inspiring authors. And that may mean that we're interviewing someone who supports authors and inspires them to continue writing, as in the case of Kent, and someone who may be an author themselves. And Kent, I believe you all also fall into that category, correct?
Yes.
Awesome, terrific. So Kent is the founder of Inkwell Ghostwriting, which helps leaders grow their business through books and other content. He's also the host of the Daily Writer podcast, which helps writers cultivate the habits for creative success. In addition, Kent is the author of The Artist's Suitcase, 26 Essentials for Creative Journey. He lives in St. Peters, Missouri with his wife and son. Welcome, Kent.
Thanks, Kathy. It is awesome to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and crash your party. So thanks.
We love these twice monthly parties. We love them so much that we went to twice a month. So
I like that.
Tell me a little bit about how did you start to build your own writing habit?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know if I really have a clear answer to that other than desperation. I think a lot of times I can only speak for myself, but I think many people can relate to this, where we have this ideal of what our writing life should be like. And whenever life gets in the way, or whenever we don't feel like we have the energy or the schedule, or things in our life are not cooperating, we get kind of frustrated with that. But I think that's kind of what normal life is. And for me, just being kind of desperate is what really helps me to get my writing done. It's not necessarily having this finely tuned and finely fleshed out and organized life. It is just, I've got to get this done, and I've got to figure out how to get this work done, whether it's my client books or whether it's my own stuff or podcasting or whatever content I happen to be creating at that time. I think just kind of being desperate and needing to get stuff done is what really has helped me over the years, just to build a habit and to be able to dive in there and get it done, and to try my best and ignore those perfectionist voices that seem to crawl around inside my head 24/7.
So as humans, I know, I'll speak for myself also. It's hard for me to build a habit. Do you have any suggestions on how to make that work when it comes to writing?
I do. I've got several suggestions. I think the most important thing, honestly, in building a habit, and so just I guess a little side trail here. When you read stuff on habit building and routines and all that stuff, a lot of people give strategies for doing that. And I think those are really important, but you have to make them work for you and your life and your schedule and so forth. To me, the most important thing when you're trying to build any habit is to change your identity. And a lot of people don't think of themselves as writers. There may be even some people on this call right now where you struggle sometimes to embrace who you are as a writer. And whenever we sit down and we write that draft of something and it sometimes isn't very good, or we get frustrated, or we feel like we have writer's block, sometimes I think we tend to doubt that we can do this. We question whether we have the skill or the ability. And we wonder if those people in our lives who affirmed us as writers, we wonder if they were all crazy, because in that moment, we don't really feel like a writer. We kind of feel like a loser. At least I do sometimes, to be honest with you, because things are not maybe going well, and I'm struggling creatively, or I'm tired or whatever. But I think you have to start out with this fundamental idea that you are a writer, because you're showing up, you're doing the work, You're writing the first draft, you're revising it into a second draft, you're doing a third or fourth draft, or whatever you're creating. You are in that moment a writer, and writers are people who write. And for me, embracing that identity as a writer and telling other people I'm a writer and being public about that and trying to share helpful tips on my podcast or my writing community or whatever, that for me has been really, really helpful because I believe when you see yourself as a writer, it's much easier to build it into a habit. Just like people who want to start running. I started running a couple of years ago. I don't really look like a runner. I'm not like that, you know, uh, thin, energetic type necessarily, but I do run on a regular basis. And the most important thing for me in developing that habit was embracing my identity as a runner. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't see myself as a runner, but as soon as I started calling myself a runner and getting around other runners, that identity change was a really, really big help in helping me make some progress.
I love that because it's very much like when we do get to go out and network with people, or we're in an environment where we're meeting new people,
Mhm.
and they say, tell me what you do. How do you introduce yourself? Do you say I'm a writer?
Well, in my case, I say the first thing I say is that I'm a ghostwriter, and because that is what I do. That's my day job, if you will. But I also, and I think terminology is really, really important here. And Kathy, I'm glad you asked that because I think what we call ourselves has a huge impact on how we view ourselves and how other people view us. So I've started to use the term author because I think author has a different ring to it. It has different implications than saying you're a writer. Now, if you haven't written a book, you can't really call yourself a book author, but you can say I'm an author with my first book coming out in so and so time, or I'm an aspiring author working on my first book. So I think just embracing that title can be really, really helpful. But in terms of how I introduce myself, usually I say I'm a ghostwriter, or if I'm talking to other writers, sometimes I'll say I'm an author and I run a writing podcast or I run a membership community or whatever it is. So the context for me kind of determines what label I put on myself, but most of the time I just say ghostwriter for simplicity's sake.
I love that because there is a difference between I'm a writer, I'm an author. And even if
Mhm.
you've authored an article or you've authored your blog, there is a
You're still doing it.
it is exactly. It's something you have accomplished, and it's almost like claim it. And the more
Absolutely.
you claim it, the more you start believing that it's really true,
Absolutely.
and it will visualize.
Yeah, totally
So
agree.
are there some other tips that you could share that you have either found, learned yourself, or learned by working with other aspiring authors that can help us consider ourselves a writer? What are some things that we can do?
One of the things that now nobody's gonna like this suggestion, but I always just believe in kind of being fundamentally honest with life. But I think one of the most important things we can do is instead of trying to squeeze writing into our lives, I think it's important to remove some things from our lives if we can. And I'll give you a perfect example, which is, there's lots of really good shows on Disney Plus and Netflix. There's a lot of good movies out right now. There's a lot of ways that I could spend my time and just sort of veg out. And I'm probably going to do a lot of that this next week because I'm on vacation. But I don't honestly watch a lot of TV or a lot of Netflix. I don't watch a lot of movies because I just have stuff that I want to write. So I think one habit that's really important is deciding what slice of your life are you going to put on hold or remove so that you can make more time to write. And many times we're trying to squeeze, it's like having a jar that's full and you're just trying to squeeze a little bit more into it and there's just no room in it. So to make that room in your life, you have to take something out. And I think look at your schedule and see what can you realistically take out. It doesn't have to be excessive. I think just saying, "Hey, I'm going to watch a half hour less of TV per day" can really, really be a good start.
Now,
So
do you find there's a particular time of day that you personally are able to connect with that inner writer inside yourself, and it's easier for you to write?
there are two times of the day where I tend to write the most for my own self. And when I'm talking about writing as it applies to me, I'm talking really about my own projects. So the way that I think about my job is my client work is what I do during the day, or things for my podcast or things for my writing community. That's kind of what I consider like my day job. And it's a self-imposed day job, but it's still like a day job. And then for my own personal projects, those have to take place in the margins of the day. So typically I do my own writing either in the morning in the first hour or two of the day. So the way that I think of my schedule is at 9 o'clock, that's when I kind of turn on and do work for other people, stuff that people have hired me to do, or stuff for my community or podcast. So many times I'll do that sometime between 7 and 9 in the morning, depending on what I'm working on. But then honestly, a lot of my personal writing takes place between, I'm going to say like 8 and 10 p.m. at night. So I've got a 17-year-old son. He has a part-time job, so he works a lot during those hours. My wife, every single night for the last probably 15 years, the time that she goes out and runs is in the evening from typically 8:30 to 9:30. And then she comes back and she takes a shower and gets ready for bed and so forth. So typically between like 8 and 10, there's not a lot going on in my house. So that's when I tend to write for myself. And I think that time's going to be different for everybody. You have to do what works for you. You have to write whenever you feel your best energetically. For some people, that's late at night. For some people, that's during lunch. For some people, it's early morning. But I think you have to find that time where you can fit it in there, even if it's just for 15 minutes a day. That 15 minutes, you can write a lot in 15 minutes a day if you just sit down and do it. It can actually be really, really productive.
What is it that you write about? I mean, are you working on a book or are you working in a journal? Do you pick a topic? Tell us a little bit about that.
You know, I feel kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I believe in journaling and I think it's very, very powerful. I wish that I practiced journaling more consistently. It's just not something I tend to do every day. I do it maybe once every few weeks. I'll break out my journal and write in it. But for me, what have been working on the last probably year or so, and this will be the next few years, is typically it's book content. So I'm working on I'm just calling it a secret book project right now, because it's something only a couple people know about. It's actually going to be a gift book for somebody in my family that they don't know about. And it's also a way for me to test out some habit systems, some writing systems in my life to see if they work. So that's a project that I'm working on right now. I'm also working on a book that's called The Daily Writer, which will be 365 meditations for writers. That book will come out next October sometime. And that's like a daily devotion kind of a format. So I'm working on that 1 or 2 days a week and writing those daily entries. And then I'm also working on a little book called How to Build a Writing Habit. Really, it's the same kind of stuff that we're talking about here. So I'm kind of juggling several of my own projects that'll come out over the next year or so.
And do you actually put time on your calendar, where you pencil it in or type it in on your calendar that
You know,
says, this is my writing time?
I used to do that, but since I've now been self-employed, since spring, I'm totally full-time in my business. I don't put that on my calendar. I just kind of internally know 7 to 9 in the morning is when I try my best to focus on my own writing, or in the evenings, 8 to 10, somewhere along those lines.
Mhm.
Sometimes I go a lot later. Sometimes I go till 1 or 2 in the morning. Not very often. Like the older I get, I have less energy, that late at night. But sometimes I go later. Sometimes I don't do it at all in the evenings. But those are the time blocks when mentally I kind of set aside to work on my own writing.
I do want to remind everybody, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll make sure and pull you in. And at the same time, so are you one of those writers that you carry like a small little, 2x3 spiral bound little notebook in a pocket, and when you get ideas, you write them down, or do you like put them on your phone in a notes section? Do you get ideas when you're out in just the world?
Yeah, I used to carry a notebook with me, but over the last few years, technology has advanced so much. I actually keep all that stuff on my phone. There's two things that there's three places I put ideas. Really, I guess two. I'm trying to think of how I've changed my organization system the last couple of years. So the writing app that I use for almost everything is Scrivener. I don't know if any of the rest of you use Scrivener or not. I don't think the app is really that important. You just have to pick something and use it. But for me, I use Scrivener, and they have a mobile app that's really, really good. So many times when I'm out running, or sometimes if I'm waiting for my son, if I'm picking him up from work and I'm just sitting in my truck for 15 minutes,
Mhm.
I'll open up Scrivener and I'll dictate some ideas for stuff. If I'm out walking or running, a lot of times, because I try to be hands-free if I can, I'll just say, hey, I gotta shut my phone off so my phone doesn't hear it. I'll say hey Siri, make a note, and Siri will go on my iPhone. Siri will go, I'm listening, and then I'll just say whatever the idea is. It might be an idea for a story. It might be a reminder to include this in a client book. Whatever idea I have, Siri records it in a note, and then because I use a Mac, also the Notes app on my iPhone syncs immediately with the Notes app on my Mac, and I've got all those notes there, and then I can transfer those into book project files or whatever I need. So I use that dictation feature a lot, and I try
Awesome.
to use technology to my advantage.
Can you talk a little bit about Scrivener?
Sure.
Pretend none of us know anything about it.
So Scrivener is an app that a lot of writers use to organize their material. And I use it. I don't really write fiction. A lot of fiction writers use Scrivener because you kind of have several things all in one view. You have on the left-hand side, you have what's called a binder. It's kind of like a file folder organization system. So right now, as I'm looking at a client book that's pulled up here, I've got every chapter in a separate folder on the left. Then in the middle, you have the writing window, very much like Microsoft Word. On the right-hand side of the screen, you have a little box for a synopsis of that chapter. And then you have a little box for notes as well. And I really, really love Scrivener because I can dump transcripts, I can dump articles, I can dump ideas into one single file that exists in Scrivener. And I've got all that stuff right there for one single project. As opposed to something like Google Docs where you have to have like a separate file for everything, or Microsoft Word or Evernote or whatever it is. So for me, Scrivener has really, really helped me be productive because I'm usually working on several projects at once. And whatever the stuff is, I can dump it all into Scrivener and it's all right there, immediately accessible to me, which I love.
And does that translate if someone wants to finish in Microsoft Word, does that download into Microsoft Word?
It does. You can do that. You can export files to Word. What I do, so I'll take a client project, for example. Right now I'm working on 2 books for clients. So when I finish a draft of something in Scrivener, I copy that and I paste it into Word, and then I format it, and then I send to them. Typically, with the correct spacing and fonts and all that stuff, because some clients like to give comments on Word. They'll do the track changes feature and make comments and changes. Other clients don't like to do that. They'll just call and say, hey, we've got these couple changes we want to make or whatever. But I think sending something in a Word document obviously looks really professional, and it's kind of the standard. So, but yeah, Scrivener plays really well with Word for sure.
Oh, that's great. And can you spell that? I'm getting ready. I've got it typed out. I just want to make sure I've spelled it correctly to share with everybody.
Sure. It's SCRIVENER.
In ER. Okay.
Mhm.
Put
And
that
it's
in.
created by a company called Literature and Latte, which is a cool name for a company.
That's fun. Yeah. So when I want to make sure it's a Scrivener, because I've had a couple authors ask about it, and we prefer Word documents. So it's great to hear
Oh,
that it comes to
yeah,
us in a
totally.
Word file. And so that's great.
Yeah, when you're working with as a publisher, you would not want a Scrivener file because it's just way too messy. But I think from a writing standpoint, that's what I use. And then whenever I give stuff to other people, it's almost always in a Word document.
Yeah. I've got a great question. Fancy Lee's asking, how do you become a ghostwriter?
That is a great question. And gosh, I wish I had a really good answer. I sort of stumbled into it, to be honest with you. The short, which is what a lot of ghostwriters say, and I realize that's not a very helpful answer. But the way that it happened for me was not to go into a big whole long story with it, but the nuts and bolts of it is that several years ago, I knew that at that point in my college teaching career, I wanted to make a pivot of some kind. Our college was declining. I mean, the whole higher ed industry has been crumbling all around us over the last decade anyway. But I wanted to make a transition out of that, and I wanted to build my own business and really focus on writing. So I started doing freelance work just wherever I could get it, whether it was podcast show notes, articles, developmental editing, whatever I could do to kind of scrape up some cash on the side and begin building a business is what I did. And then a couple of years ago, I decided that I wanted to really try and make a go of this. So as I looked at all the different things that you could do as a writer to make income, the two things that appealed to me the most were copywriting and ghostwriting. And I chose ghostwriting because you can make a pretty good living with that if you play your cards right and you get around the right type of clients and so forth. But I chose that because also because ghostwriting is a very simple thing to explain to people. Everybody wants to have a book. Everybody wants to be an author. And so when I explain to people that I write books for people who don't have the time or the desire to spend, 200 hours or whatever writing a book, that's a very straightforward conversation. And I like that because it's very, very simple and straightforward. But the way that I got into it on a practical level was that I took a course by a friend of mine named Nick Pavlidis. He runs this course called Ghostwriter School, and it's fantastic. I went through that
You
a
want
couple
to
years ago.
spell his name, Nick? What's his last name?
Yes, it's Pavlidis. If you go to, I'll put it in the chat here.
Okay.
It's ghostwriterschool.com. And his name is Nick Pavlidis. He's a very successful ghostwriter. And I went through his training, and it changed my life because he teaches you how to write books quickly, but he also teaches you how to market yourself as a ghostwriter, how to build a business. And the thing that I loved most about that was that he doesn't give you all these crazy complicated marketing things. The basic premise is he just says, tell people that you're building a ghostwriting business. And that's literally all that I did. I just started sharing that with people. And the cool thing about being a ghostwriter is that when you say that term to people, hey, I'm a ghostwriter, it automatically makes them curious about it because people always want to know, what does a ghostwriter do and how does that work? And why would you want to write books for somebody else but not get credit and all that stuff? So there's a curiosity factor there that always happens whenever I share that with people, which I love. But
There's
then,
also that old, Ernest Hemingway fascination of you could live in Key West and you could have margaritas every day. And
yeah. And for me, I wanted to have a business where I could determine my own schedule. I could set my own income. I could focus on writing. I could work from anywhere. That was really important to me. And ghostwriting met all those criteria. So
That's
then the
awesome.
way that I got my first client was that I just started sharing with my friends and family and people online that I was doing that. And then once you start doing that, sooner or later, somebody's going to come to you and say, hey, I got this friend who wants a book, or I want a book. Sooner or later, you're going to land a client if you keep doing that consistently. And that's how it happened for me. I got my first client a couple of years ago, signed the first contract. And I was like, hey, if I can do this once, I can do it over and over and over again, which is just what I've continued to do.
Well, and actually, I'm trying to remember how we connected. If someone gave you my name.
I was thinking about that the other day, and I was like, how did I connect with Kathy? Who was it that connected me? And I can't remember, honestly.
Usually everything comes through referrals. And so I'll have to go back in my emails and see.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's an email trail there somewhere.
I'm sure there is somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So any other questions? I know, Kent, you mentioned that you have a gift for our authors that we'll be able to send out the link to. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's not quite done. It'll be done in the next few weeks. This is a little book called How to Build a Writing Habit. And it's drafted, but it's not quite done yet. So if there's a way that when that's done, if I can send that to you and we can make that available to people, that would be
happy
fantastic.
to.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah. So I also, earlier in the day today, before we actually went live and started recording, we allowed people to introduce themselves, and I wanted to give that chance. I'm going to unmute everyone. Let me find it here. Oh, you get to unmute yourself. If you would like to take a second and introduce yourself and didn't get to in that first round, just raise your hand physically and we'll make sure you get a chance to do that. I know I've learned a lot today just from our conversation, Kent. So thank you so much for being here today.
Totally my pleasure. Happy to help.
Yeah. So our next Lunch and Learn is going to be January 13th. Make sure I got this right. Right. At 11:30 a.m. So it's about 3 weeks away. And we'll be talking with Mary Nunnally. She's an instructional designer and award-winning course developer. She's going to be talking to us about gamification, how to create a game and more interaction with your audience and with your customer. So I do hope we can see everyone there for that. Invite your friends. And Kent, thank you so much. I'll remind everyone, we will send out a link do the recording sometime next week. I greatly appreciate everyone being here. Enjoy your holidays, whatever you're doing. And Kent, I'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Sounds fantastic. Thanks so much, Kathy.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Happy
Okay, thanks again.
holidays. Bye-bye.